Thank you, Michael. And honestly, it's just a pleasure for me, John, to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you and Michael.
And Michael, you're up in Sydney in the same as John. You're both in Sydney. I'm the Melbourne one stuck down here. So, Michael, can I bring you in there, please?
Yes, and thanks, John. Great to talk to you. And being a Sydney lad myself, well, not originally, of course, but and living in Sydney, I suppose to start off, John, in 2005, I well remember you actually flying high in the political field. And indeed, people saying you're going to be the Premier in New South Wales someday, which I'm sure that was your ambition.
It was.
I think you're one of the youngest leaders ever to be voted into a major political party. So you certainly were up there with the big lads, as they say. But it all unraveled then in around 2005 when we heard that you were journeying with depression, which of course led you to a very dark time in your life. And down the road of suicide and other things. Would you like to just talk about that to us, please?
Yeah, look, Michael, Marty, I'd always been ambitious to be the Premier of New South Wales. Yeah. I like to think that I was restlessly ambitious, not ruthlessly ambitious. My old grandmother used to say to me, be careful when you climb up the ladder who you climb over because you might need them on the way down. I've always
My mum used to say that too. Be careful on the way up the ladder, you might need them on the way back down.
That's right. So I was ambitious, and I was never ashamed to be ambitious. But yes, I was, I think, on track to be Premier. The tide was slowly but surely turning our way from opposition to government. The then Premier, Bob Carr, you might remember, who'd been very successful, very popular, he retired. And often when a long-term leader in government retires, it opens up the opportunity for a change of government. And then I said and did some stupid things at an event, Michael, and within 3 weeks that became public, and things went bad very quickly for me. I catastrophized things. I resigned as the leader, and things kept getting worse. And I found myself in the difficult position that I felt I'd become such a matter of shame for my wife, my family, my friends, my supporters, my party, and that I was a burden on them, that I found myself in the situation that many people find them in, themselves in, that not simply the only thing to do, but bizarrely the best thing in my mind, the best thing for those around me was to take my own life and get out of their world, to exit, if you like. And a lot of people hear that, and people are entitled to their views, and many would think that's selfish, and I understand that. But I ask people never to overlay rational thought on probably one of the most irrational things any human will ever do. I thank God every day that I didn't complete my suicide, that I was interrupted, and that I'm here today. But I know what it's like to be in that incredibly dark space where you think you're a burden on other people, and that the way to lift the burden on these people you love, you care for them so much in your own mind that the way to keep loving them and caring for them is to lift the burden by taking your own life. So I do know what it's like to be in that incredibly dark space.
It's not a selfish thing, because some people can say it's selfish, and I know in my case with my mother, but when you think about it, it's actually not a selfish thing, as you just explained there. You feel they're better off without you.
Yeah,
that's a powerful
right.
thing.
When the message is we're better off with you, we're better off with you, and choose life. Wham, that band back in the 1980s had a choose life. Right. And also, even when you think nobody cares, even when you think you've burned all your bridges, there are organisations, there are people like LifeLine who care to keep you alive and get you through that difficult time. So, it is... the point I made, Marty, is that some people will think it's selfish, but people need to understand that you're actually not in a fit mind. Obviously, you're not in a fit or a sound mind. Yeah. And that in many cases, if you convince yourself, no doubt, like your dear mother, Marty, that she was a burden on everybody around her, and this was the way to lift the burden on them. Yeah. So it's a difficult spot to be in. And
I suppose, John, it's even common for people who are contemplating taking their own life to actually be happy before they do it.
Well, funny, look, that's fascinating, Michael. That's a fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah.
My experience and the experience I've talked to for other people is you're looking for the answer to your problem. You've got this incredible weight on your shoulders, or everything's gone wrong. And bearing in mind, you don't have to be mentally ill to take your own life. It's an active impulse. You know, you could live 100 years, the first 50 without a problem, the last 50 without a problem, but right in the middle, something goes wrong. Your marriage collapses, your business collapses, your gambling debts get too big, you become an alcoholic, whatever it might, or a combination of those things.
Yeah.
And at that point, you decide to take your own life. And if you have the means by which to take your own life, that increases your likelihood of taking your own life.
Yeah.
But when you get to that point, Michael, and what I experienced is when I worked out the solution, which was taking my own life, I went very calmly about doing it. I went very calmly. I mean, I had to go and do a few things. I had to buy things. I mean, I'm not going to go into the detail. That's not appropriate. But you go calmly about doing it because you've worked out the solution. You've found the answer you've been looking for. So you're right, whether it's a happiness or a contentness or a satisfaction, or just that you've finally got the answer you've been looking for in the middle of this crisis or for a long period of time. So yes, it is. And I want to tread gently when I talk about this, because to take your own life, you have to do something. You have to do something active to go down that path. And if you are completely irrational, that will be difficult. But if you've got to sort of walk through these steps. So yes, it is a fascinating dichotomy, isn't it? That at that point, when you're most distressed, when you're most suicidal, you're most irrational, that you can do something calmly.
And a lot of people do, they say that they do it in, spontaneously, but as you just explained, and as Michael was saying, really pre-plan it, because they think it's a good thing for the world and their family. And that's in my case. How did your wife cope and your family cope with because they would have been, I know it's fine with the public and everything like that, media are always going to say stuff, but personally, and especially your wife, how did she cope with that? And how did you come back trust-wise, as in...
Yeah. Look, we've been married 30 years this December, so I'm a very lucky man. I'm very lucky I've been given second chances in my life by my wife.
Yes.
My wife sat there during my time in politics, and the harder I worked and the more I got closer to the goal and the harder that work became, she was watching me sort of slowly but surely spin out of control. And she was always sitting there waiting for something to happen. She tells this great story, Marty and Michael, that she read somewhere that the contents of banana, the makeup of bananas, includes something that's very good for depression. So she thought, let's give this a go. So unbeknownst to me, we're eating banana bread and banana splits and banana this and banana that. We found out years later you have to reach your body weight daily in bananas to make any difference. So Lucy was sitting there waiting for something to happen, and when I look back at it, something was going to happen. Whether it happened before, if I became Premier, or after I became Premier, something was going to happen, because what drove a lot of my depression was difficult times when we were a kid. We had my parents fought a lot, then they got divorced, then Mum brought a man into the house who was an alcoholic and abused her physically. And I just dug all that. I pushed all that stuff way down deep inside me. And my beautiful brother, when I had my suicide attempt, said to me, "You know what? You pushed all that shit down too far, and it's all come up again." And he's right. It was always going to come one day in some way. Yeah. So Lucy was incredibly understanding, Michael. She thankfully was studying psychology. She has a master's in organisational psychology now. So this was an area of interest for her. She knew all about my background and all about my family stresses and pressures and the like. And she knew how hard I was working. So she knew I was going to hit a wall. She knew that. But she will today. And Lucy has just retired after 8 years on the Mental Health Commission of Australia, 5 as the chair. So she's very much involved in mental health as well.
Did Lucy get involved in that? Was she involved in that beforehand, or did she get involved because of, or did that enhance?
She was already studying psychology, and this was the path she was already on. Right. But she will describe herself as my carer, and really she is. And the great thing now, Michael, is she knows, and I'm better. The older I get, the better I get. She knows if she can see if something's coming. You know what I mean? She looks forward to things. Oh no, John's reacting this way. We need to jump in and intervene. And as I get older too, you know, things like sleep. I've come to realise I need a good, decent amount of sleep. You know, 20 years ago when I was in politics, I could operate on 4, 5 or 6 hours a day and run like a stallion. I just can't do that anymore because I need the sleep for my mental health.
John, we could talk all day about this subject. Obviously, it's a huge subject, and thank you for sharing your private stuff with us. So moving along, then, of course, 131114. We all know this number, which is fantastic. It's wide, I suppose, now, which is, of course, LifeLine, which was founded in Australia. Can you tell us a bit about the foundation and how it was founded by the Reverend Walker, wasn't it, I believe?
Yeah, Alan Walker was probably the great Protestant churchman of his time in Australia. Very high profile, very big in the anti-Vietnam movement, very big in the religious movement around the world. He was a Methodist minister. The Methodist Church merged in the 70s with the Presbyterians and the Congregations to become the Uniting Church. Sydney people, or around Australia, we've all heard of the Wesley missions. That Wesley in Sydney used to be the Central Methodist mission. Yep. And he started there, and it's a remarkable story. And I can't tell you how thankful we are for this man's vision and his commitment and his strength. So back in 1961, he received a telephone call at his house on a Sunday night. And the man said, "You don't know who I am. My name's Roy. I'm going to kill myself, and this is why." So Alan Walker had that conversation with him. And 2 days later, the police at King's Cross, a pretty seedy part of Sydney, the police at King's Cross rang Alan Walker and said, "Are you Alan Walker?" He said, "Yes, I am." They said, "We've got a dead body here with a letter pinned to the chest with your name on it." And from that point in 1961, Alan Walker realised we needed a lifeline. We needed a lifeline, and it's great to be involved in an organisation where our name tells you exactly what we do. You know, we needed a lifeline to throw out to people to bring them back at that point of suicide. Now, let me take you back to 61, 62 to 63, right? Suicide was a crime, and if not a crime, it may as well have been a crime in most jurisdictions in Australia and in most places in the world. You Irish fellas would know it was a crime for a long, long time with the influence of the Catholic Church in places like Ireland. You wouldn't be buried from a church. A Christian church wouldn't bury you. A Jewish synagogue wouldn't bury you. A Muslim mosque wouldn't bury you. People would lie. They'd say, "Oh, Dad had a heart attack," or the police would agree it was a misadventure. We lived in this unreal world, and Alan Walker in 1963, amongst all of this, said, "We need a lifeline. We can't hide about this anymore. We need to help people." So that's the story. We're 60 years old on the 16th of March next year. And we're now answering, I'll give you an example. Here we are, we're answering on average. Now we do text messages as well as telephone calls, about 3,500 texts and calls on average a day. Just 2.5 years ago, before the bushfires in Australia and COVID, our average, now we didn't have text then, but our average was 2,400. So the new normal for us is going from 2,400 to 3,500 calls a day. And here's what's most interesting. 10 years ago, when I was the president and chairman of LifeLine Australia, if our calls went up, I used to think, "Oh my God, something's going wrong. You know, this is a bad thing." Now, all this time later, particularly through COVID, yes, that means there's a greater demand on our services. Yes, that means people are in stress and pressure, but it also means they're reaching out. And rather than suffering in silence. So we've been on the rooftops with loudhailers for 60 years telling people to reach out if they need Lifeline, and they're doing it. So there are two sides to the coin of Lifeline getting more calls. It means there is more stress and pressure, but it means people are reaching out. And during COVID, when our calls went through the roof, we had men in particular, we had a couple of men who rang in, and because it's all anonymous, so we don't know who it is. And the anonymity is, in fact, one of the benefits. That's why people call.
Yes.
They call Lifeline to talk to a stranger because they can't tell mum, dad, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, brother, sister. They can only tell a stranger. But we had people say, not only is this the first time I've called Lifeline, I never thought I'd call Lifeline. And you know what? That's a win for us because it means these people, yes, they're in distress, but they're reaching out rather than suffering in silence. So Interestingly, Michael, during the 2 years of COVID, year on year, we saw a 6% reduction in suicide in Australia. Now, that's remarkable. We saw that around large developed countries around the world. At the same time, we saw a massive increase in demand on mental health services.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping one of the few good things that come out of COVID is more people are asking for help and fewer are taking their lives.
And more talking about it. That's the whole thing.
I was going to say the same thing, Marty. We'll spend a bit of time actually, maybe how do we encourage people to actually come forward. So, John, to finish on this bit, give us some symptoms then of people that, from your understanding, may be troublesome way, and maybe I've got no problem asking somebody in a particular situation, are you suicidal?
Yes.
That stigma to me, that's over. That day is gone.
Yeah.
Stigmatized. But tell us a little bit about signs which maybe we could look for or observers.
Good question.
Well, I'm not a clinician. I want to make that point, but
and we're
neither are we.
Yeah, but all of my experience and everything I've read and discussed with clinicians is it's usually when somebody has a mood change that lasts for a period of time. So it's not just a bad day or a bad night or a bad weekend. And I'm not being silly when I say this. It's not just because your football team lost or whatever it might be. It's something that lasts over a period of time. And it's usually where somebody, to give you an example, who's always well-dressed, always shaved, always looks after themselves, starts dressing badly, not changing their clothes, getting unkept, right? Or it's when somebody who doesn't drink heavily starts drinking heavily. It's when somebody, on things like food, you start eating a lot or you stop eating. So you have massive changes in your mood that aren't planned. Behaviour, somebody who's usually very engaged with friends, with their local sporting team, with their family, with their workplace, all of a sudden very withdrawn. Or somebody who's usually pretty good in the office is turning up late, not doing their work, really. So the challenge we have in those things is often we go for disciplinary action. Well, you're not doing your job. So what's wrong with you? So if this lasts for a while, then that change of mood, I think that's one of the big symptoms as well. So change of mood, change of habit, somebody, and you can see this in yourself if you're self-aware, but somebody who can't sleep or somebody who can't get up, these massive changes in people's mood. So they're all those sorts of things. But you're so right, Michael, on the point. One of the things we've learned, and this is hard, right? Because people don't think this way. One of the things we've learned is rather than saying to somebody, oh, mate, is everything okay? Let's go and have a beer. Let's go to the pub or let's go out for dinner or let's go and see a movie or to a friend, let's go shopping, whatever it might be. Don't pussyfoot around. Go directly and ask that question. Do you think you're suicidal? Do you want to kill yourself? Do you want to harm yourself? Now, that's a very hard thing for many people to ask because some just find it incredibly personal, a personal intervention. For others, they worry, well, if I mention the word, aren't I putting the thought in their mind? And the answer is no. The answer is no. But what it does is it sucks it out of them. It forces them. You have a blunt conversation, a direct conversation. And we all hope most people will say no, but they might tell you what's going on. Look, I've just broken up with my girlfriend, or I can't pay off my credit card, and or whatever it might be, or something's gone wrong. I'm really doing bad. I'm not coping with mum dying 3 months ago, whatever it might be. And it's different for each of us, right? You can't stereotype these things. So really, what you said, Michael, is absolutely right in this day and age. And I've tried to take my own life. I live with suicidal ideation. I live with depression. I have no problem talking about my suicidal ideation because the more people who talk about it, particularly people who are, if I can say, high profile or leaders in the community, the more somebody listening says, hold on, if it's all right for the boss or for that sporting person or that ex-politician or whatever, it's all right for him to have depression and suicidality. It's all right for me to have depression and suicidality. So like so many things in life, Marty and Michael, at the end of the day, this is the way, it's all about leadership.
As you said in which you're playing that on the front of the show, but when you said, which I loved, was if they had cancer, it's not a stigma. People would feel sorry for you, but when you've got the mental health. They don't see what goes on.
Exactly.
So it shouldn't be. And that's how just talking about it. And as you just said there, a lot of people don't talk to their family.
No.
And obviously LifeLine, it's great because they can go to, when my mum passed away, the Samaritans in Ireland.
Yes.
They rang.
Who are just like the LifeLine in Australia.
Yeah, and they rang my brother, and we never knew that she was talking to him for 10 years. And I believe that they kept her alive, the same as what you did.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Well, to your point, I've often said I prefer that you cut my arm off because people see you don't have an arm.
If you're in a wheelchair,
they can see.
If you're in a wheelchair on crutches, you're wearing an eye patch, they'll open the door for you. But the fact they don't know what's going on in there.
Yeah, and often, of course, you don't know what's going on. This is a new thing for you, or you've lived with it for so long. A friend of mine who was a man in his 50s, and he was always a very reserved human being, very smart, very successful in life. At like 52 or 53, he said, I've always hated mornings, lots of stuff. But at that age, he determined that he needed to talk to a psychologist, and he found out he had really bad depression, but he'd lived with it for so long. He'd lived with the black dog.
He thought it was a normal day of life.
Correct.
He thought it was normal. That's what a lot of people just accepted as normal when it's not actually normal. It's normal in their head, but
correct.
But
what is normal? Talking about we talk about it. What's normal is that we talk about it.
Yes. And talking about it and talking about listening. Julie Bentley, actually, who was the CEO of the Samaritans, she said being listened to without judgment is an extraordinarily powerful thing. So, and I worked for 10 years in a hospital in the chaplaincy, and all I could do was listen. I'm not trained in any other, but I got used to being a good listener. Now, when you're talking about listening, there's listening and then there's listening.
Yeah.
And I found by listening to the story and let the people, without judging them or criticizing them, that in itself had a healing effect.
Oh, it's extraordinary, Michael. People will often tell me, I called LifeLine. You'll bump people in the street or you'll see them at an event and they'll say, I called LifeLine last week, last year, 10 years ago, right? And they often say it saved my life, which is incredibly fulfilling, and I feed that back to the organisation. But what they'll often say is, and I'll say, well, how did it go, when you called LifeLine? And they will say, they listened to me. They listen to me. Yeah. And we train our people to listen, active listening. We train our people to listen.
Yeah. I had a brother who was a Catholic priest in London, and unfortunately he passed away very young at 55. He's a brilliant priest and a lovely man, spent a lot of time with alcohol and drug abuse. And he wrote a paper and he sent this to me when I was studying myself. And he said, I have discovered that one of my strengths is my capacity to hold a person's story in such a way that they too hear it in a new way. I've had the privilege of seeing profound transformation taking place when such a journey, when such a personal story is held in the reassuring and accepting embrace of a wounded healer.
Well, beautiful words. I mean,
that's lovely.
The other thing, I'll tell you what's very, very important in your brother's message, your late brother's message, is this. In most cases, to recover from a suicide attempt or to live with your depression, whatever it might be, you do have to transform. You have to make changes. It's a bit like if you've lost a lung for smoking, you've got to stop smoking so you don't lose the other lung. I mean, that's an extreme example, but for many people, it might involve getting off the grog or getting off the betting. It might involve changes to their behaviour. For me, it involved me not getting involved in situations that I knew would depress and stress me. I use this example. There's and I hope I don't upset anybody when I say this. There's a reason why so many people only get together once a year on Christmas Day. It's because they don't get along. They don't get along.
No, I'll agree with that.
Yet we've got
3 ex-wives. I agree.
Yeah, we've got this enormous social pressure to do things. So a lot of things we do because the social expectations. We go to Auntie so-and-so's place, or we go to this dinner, or we go to that. And I've just learned to say no to those things. And initially people think you're pretty bloody rude. But you've got to say to yourself, well, I know that's not good for me. I actually know it's going to upset and distress me. So I'd prefer for people to think I'm rude than for me to turn up and walk away very upset and very distressed. And
why is Christmas time then? So I know it's a high rate of suicide. A lot of people that I've spoken to, it's kind of bad, not good memories? Is that because it's all so emotional?
Oh, I think, Marty, it's because people think they should be happy because you're meant to be happy at Christmas, and for some people, you're very unhappy at Christmas. They don't have 10 members of the family. I mean, they have no one in their life. They don't have anyone to invite them to Christmas lunch, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
It's just another day of the year for them. They don't have presents, and then you have people who just look around. Why is everybody else happy and I'm not? I'm miserable. So that's part of it. But it's more about, my point is about these social things that we're used to doing, that some of us feel we have to do, and we shouldn't feel we have to do them if they're no good for us.
Yeah. And as a guy, keep going about listening, as I said, like all the subjects, we could talk a lot about it. But it's also, John, from my experience and from what I've read, that people actually find more benefit or more positive outcomes from people, friends or family who they've formed a relationship with, that they can feel safe and trust and have that sacred space that they have established, that they can trust them, as opposed to even a professional help. I can go for an hour to my psychiatrist and then come back next to her for another hour. It becomes, and I'm not sure if they're even honest with their professional sometimes, whereas with a personal person,
So true.
you really feel on it. They feel this guy is listening to me.
What you're saying, Michael, is it's not quite whatever works for you, but different things work for different people. A lot of people say they don't want to take medication. I take medication. I've been taking medication for 17 years, every day of my life. It works for me. It doesn't work for everybody. And it can be a bit trial and error. I mean, we know so much about the physical body in 2022. We still know so little about the brain. So a lot of people have had bad experiences with medications 20, 30 years ago and think that's not the way. I always encourage people to give it a go, but if that's what their professional wants them. But for some people, during COVID, I did a lot of media with John. What do we do? Tell us what LifeLine thinks we should do during this lockdown. And do you remember we used the phrase of social isolation? Terrible phrase. What we meant was physical isolation, right?
Yeah.
Stay by yourself physically. Social isolation, we didn't want that. But I said to people, we always talk about how exercise is important. A lot of us think, oh God, I don't want to do 50 push-ups at the gym, or, I'm overweight, I'm going to make a fool of myself. What we really mean is a bit of outdoor activity. Get out, go for a walk, get some sun, get some rain on your face, half an hour every day. So that works for some people. Having other people to care about can work for other people. Having dogs and pets to care about can help for other people. Not drinking too much. During COVID, sitting at home eating like a pig and drinking like a fish wasn't good for a lot of people. Not just physically, but mentally. And I said to people, and this doesn't need COVID to happen, right? We've all got mobile phones. We've all got lists and lists of people we talk to from time to time. You can change somebody's life by just on the way home or the way to work thinking, I haven't spoken to Marty for 6 months, 12 months, a year,
Absolutely.
2 years. Went to school with him, used to work with him, used to play footy or netball with him, whatever it might be. I'll give him a call or I'll drop him a text. Do you know what? You could make that person's day. You could make that, because you might be the only voice that talks back to them
Absolutely.
all day. And it takes you 5 or 10 minutes. And particularly if they live alone, or that mum's just died, or I try and maybe this is the old Irish Catholic in me, boys, but and I learned this in politics, is you contact people, you can contact them in the middle of an event, whether it's a suicide attempt or a death in the family, but it's really good to ring them 3 and 4 weeks later, because a lot of people think that they're past it. But 3 or 4 weeks later, after something significant, emotionally significant like that, a lot of people stop calling, and they don't do it negatively. They just think, they're okay now. I'll leave them, or they feel, I don't know what I'd say. But, I just learned, particularly through politics, strangely enough, when you have tragic deaths in your own constituency, in your own electorate, for people you don't know, just turn up and knock on the door and say, look, on behalf of the community, I'm really, terrible things like kids dying in car accidents. And those things, you know, you just turn up and knock on. Is there anything I can do? Is there any? Can the community do anything? Can I do anything? And if you ring people, of course, they'll say, "I don't come." No, we're right. But you just turn up, and it's very old-fashioned. It's what used to happen in my grandmother's day and all that sort of stuff. But so, and this is really hard with suicide because people's lives change forever if somebody in their family takes their own life, and their friends and family can change forever because people don't know what to say. They're not making a judgment. They're not thinking it's morally wrong or anything. They just don't know what to say.
And John,
they have no idea what to say.
Somebody said if you don't know what to say, it's because there isn't anything to say.
But turn up and take the dog for a walk, or cook a meal, or you know, run an errand.
The phone call. My mum used to. That's why she rang the Samaritans. She wanted someone just to chat with. Yes. And in her suicide letter, just on what you're saying, John, is so correct. When she put down, I can't sit and wait for the phone to ring.
Yeah,
that was.
And you know, every day we walk past people sitting on the street, homeless, often unwashed and dirty, and they smell, and they're begging for money. And you know, I'd lay money that most of those people are living with a mental illness. Now, if we walked somebody, if we would not, we just would not walk past somebody who just had a heart attack in front of us. We wouldn't.
True, yeah.
And we wouldn't have to be a heart surgeon. At the very least, we'd ring 000. We'd try and give some help, and others would jump in. And so we walk past mental illness every day of the year. Well, not every day, but you know what I mean. We walk past regularly. In a way, we wouldn't walk past. Back to the point we made earlier, we wouldn't walk past a physical illness.
Now, again, another point I suppose we should keep in mind if you're supporting someone, don't feel you can't fix anything.
Correct.
You really can't. You just listen, be a listening presence. That's all you can do. And that in itself can be healing and can have a very positive outcome.
And because our suicide is, broadly speaking, an act of impulse, you know, you might just be walking past a cliff top and think, that's not right. That person's but something's wrong there. And you just walk over and say good day and just distract them. You know, the research is extraordinary. You know, putting the single most significant way to reduce suicides is to remove the means of suicide. Yes. So if you put up a bloody ugly big fence on a bridge, you make it harder for someone to take their own life. If you put a fence up on a cliff, you make it harder. And the research is quite extraordinary. If people need to jump over a fence or whatever it might be, many people will turn around and go back again at that point. So you might be that person walking past and just say to them, are you okay? Everything all right? Or, gee, it's a nice day. You know, that you might even
distract them and just talk to them.
You might be there to, you might be there to fix them. You might be there just to save them for that moment. So, and these things are hard. We're often taught not to interact with each other. And well, that's that.
But John, can I just interrupt you for a sec? I have to say, you're an amazing man, the way you can speak out openly about it. And I didn't know about you. I knew about LifeLine for years, but personally, but the way you can speak openly about it, I think is so important. And that's what people need to take an example of just listening to this show.
And Marty, can we go into just briefly the area now of moral injury, which is actually came about mainly, there's a Dr. Jonathan Shea in America. And after the Vietnam War, he got involved with a lot of the troops. And he had this discussion with people saying they had PTSD. Yeah. He said, yes, he said, but there is another part of it. He said, their moral compass has been smashed through war, through killing someone, which is abhorrent. Kill someone it has to have an effect on you morally as well as probably physically. And he had actually a big debate with them, and they came up with this a moral injury. And someone just to kind of clarify said, a moral injury is the damage done by one's conscience or moral compass when that person perpetrates, witnesses, or fail to prevent acts that transgress one's moral beliefs and values or ethical codes. So when you do something that's against what you are and what your principles are and your values are, it has to have a moral.
Oh, and when you observe it as well, I think that was part of the definition, observing it as well. I've got a friend who's a police officer. Yes, you know, John, I can put up with the crooks, I can put up with the murders. I'll tell you what I can't put up with, he says to me. I can't put up with turning up to a drug house where there are kids sleeping on a cockroach-infested mattress and malnourished or eating McDonald's at 5 times a day. He said, that's what I can't handle. So his moral compass is, look, part of my job is dealing with terrible car accidents and all of those sorts of things and having to tell people somebody's died. But the thing that really hurts my moral compass is people who can't look after their kids and people who have their kids in poverty because they're drug-addled or whatever it might be. So, look, I'm not aware of, I'm not a student of that area, but I understand it. I mean, and it makes life hard, right? Because, in most of our lives, we don't see morally confronting things on a daily basis. Or if we see them, they're fantasy. We're reading a book or we're watching a movie, right? And we know that. We know it's not real.
Yeah.
But we ask police officers every day to strap a firearm to their hip and to go out and deal with some of the most horrific situations that you could imagine. In just outside Sydney yesterday, five kids in a car of 6
Absolute, that's horrendous.
died as young as 13, and the senior police officer who turned up said, I've been a copper for 38 years, I've never seen anything like
That's
this.
so sad.
When we need police officers. We can't exist without police officers. And
Michael was saying there about moral injury. It's not just, we started on the army thing, but just as you're saying police officers, because I've got 3 ex-police officers' wives, and I got a good communication, but it also goes down for nurses. They have to go to work and see all this stuff, and they bring it home. It's not just one category. There's the army, they have to kill someone, but then there's the moral injury of, say, for example, someone wants to commit suicide, but their moral injury is when they have a parent that they look up to, and all of a sudden this parent is a bad person. That goes down a ripple effect down the track, which can lead to certain, as you say, alcohol can go one way, drugs, suicide, hopefully not too many on it. But I think that's where it comes. It's not just the army, it's that, as you just
absolutely. I think of these, incredible social workers, right, who are turning up, and you've got kids, being pulled out of households that are just terribly violent or their kids are at risk, and my auntie and uncle fostered children for a long time, and they'd get these babies 6 months old who'd been fed McDonald's and things like that, and had no hope, and they'd look after them, and often they'd go back to their parents, and we'd all hope for the best. But that's distressing. There you are, and a lot of the sort of interesting point, Michael, is these are people doing the right thing, if I can use that phrase, in life and for us. They're looking after us, right? They're doing the right thing, but in doing the right thing, they're being confronted with some pretty horrible situations that we could live our entire life without seeing any of that. I'd be quite happy to live my entire life without having to see. I mean, I obviously deal with a lot of people with mental illness, but it's a happy day if I don't have to do some of the terrible work others have to do. But we need them in our society. We have to
two of the telltale signs of moral injury actually is probably shame and guilt. Now, you may not find that in PTSD because it's something that you've seen that's given you this trauma. But in moral injury, you're actually involved. It's like, to give an analogy, if you're sitting on the side of the road and some guy comes down 1,000,000 miles an hour and smashes his car into somebody, you see it and you're traumatized by it. But if you're the driver of that car and you kill someone, now you have done something that is, you've killed someone.
Yeah.
You've got a moral injury. You may have PTSD as well, but you've also committed some act which is totally against what's good, whereas the person watching it hasn't. They've observed something.
Yeah. So for your Australian listeners and viewers, ABC, the national broadcaster, has iView. You may know it. You can go and catch up on old shows. They have a program called You Can't Ask That, things you're not meant to ask in society. There's one that's incredible to this point, Michael, and it's about people who've killed other people accidentally, like somebody who has, through no fault of their own, killed a pedestrian on the road. They've jumped out at the last minute and you couldn't stop the car. A police officer who shot a man. And it's just extraordinary because you can see these people who are almost broken because they've done something that was no fault of their own, but took a life.
Yes.
So you're right. You know, these things that you can be an innocent victim, if I can use that phrase, of moral injury.
Yes.
Yeah, and I suppose we could again talk about moral injury, but again, when we're talking about moral injury, how do we deal with people like any mental or any we listening again? It gets back to listening, and even if you ask them, do you feel guilty about what's happened? That's why the army were the first to recognize it, military, because people came back from wars. And another thing which is fundamental to moral injury is if you're betrayed. Like in the army, and we've instances, as I know, I was in the army, and as a soldier, you go there knowing that you may have to go into areas of conflict and kill someone, and you do that. You come home, and maybe 5-10 years later, you're there with a child of your own. Maybe you've grown up, you're married, you got kids, and you got a 7-year-old boy, and you think back to maybe Afghanistan or somewhere where you actually killed a 7-year-old boy. But you had to, because maybe he was...
Sure, he may have had a weapon or something. And you know,
he may have.
What's interesting here, if I can extend this point, we suffer from stress and pressure in different ways and at different times. So the bushfires in Australia were 2.5 years ago. At LifeLine, we established a separate line for the bushfire affected communities. Okay, here we are 2.5 years later. We are still getting between 250 and 400 calls a day from people affected by those bushfire communities, because many of them were okay at the time. They toughed it out. They held everybody together. You know, they were the ones, you know, they were able to make it happen and then all of a sudden they wake up one morning and realise, I'll never get the baby photos back. They were burnt. They were burnt in the house. The wedding dress was burnt in the house. We're still living in a temporary house, and our house is going to take another 2 years to be built. And all of a sudden it can hit them. So we're still 2.5 years later. You might, you know, somebody from a military conflict many years before. So we'll be suffering from this. So the reality is, you know, we do suffer from mental illness. Yeah. And we do suffer from stress and pressure in different ways and at different times. And we can, as I mentioned earlier, we can be pretty good at pushing all this stuff down until there might be a trigger or something goes wrong. And then bang, it all comes out. Yeah. And it might make sense to people. People say, hold on, what, Michael, he was in the army, but that was 15 years ago. What's the problem? Doesn't make it easy. He's got a career and he's got a lovely wife and family. And so sometimes it doesn't make any sense because when I say you've managed it, you've locked it in. You put a padlock on it, and then zipped the box has burst open.
Well, Marty, could I tell John? We've just interviewed many people, and one guy, he's actually an Irish guy by the name of Pat Quinlan, and he has for.
There'd only be one Irishman called Pat Quinlan.
There'd only be one. A good one. He's an Irishman. You could have just said Pat Quinlan.
and he's a Catholic. But anyway, Pat has for 50 years. He hasn't. I actually was in the army with him way back in '62. That's how old I am. But anyway, he said we asked him, "Why are you talking now?" And was when we asked to speak. He said after 40, he said, and his brother took his own life actually up in Winton in Australia. He came to Australia and actually
in Queensland.
That's another long story, but. He said, I had the confidence in the people I spoke to, and that made me speak up. So he said, speaking to us, we talked about people and relationships and sacred space to talk to. He just said, I found you two guys and I felt comfortable. And he spoke on air about it. And he's kept this for what, Marty, maybe 50 years?
Yeah, 62 years or something.
Yeah. Thank God we live in 2022 where we can talk. In Australia, there are 100%. Some countries where we still can't talk about this. There are 35 countries in the world where suicide is still a crime. Work that out, right?
Is that right?
Extraordinary. And you know, where it's clearly the shame and the stigma and the lack of services and support. But thank God we live here today. I had a really interesting exercise about 7 or 8 years ago, in the job that I had, I spoke to a group of very, very senior businessmen and women in Australia. You know, people who are on the board of the Commonwealth Bank and on the board of Coles and things like that, right? BHP. And we had this discussion about business, and then it stopped. And all they wanted to talk to me about was mental health. They wanted to talk about their son, their daughter, their son-in-law, you know, themselves even, what they're doing in their business about mental health. So we've had a renewal in Australia, we've still got some distance to go. Let's not forget, we're not perfect. We've still got some distance to go, but thank God we live in Australia in 2022. Winston Churchill had a great line about democracy. He used to say, democracy is the worst system of government in the world, except for all the others.
Yeah.
And we probably have the worst mental health system in the world in Australia, except for all the others. It's better than it was last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And my big message, Martin and Michael, is we need to send a message of hope. It's important for people who are struggling to have hope. Hope that there's somebody who can help them, hope that they can get through this, hope that there's help. Because if we don't, if we keep saying, and I use the cancer community as a great example. Every time you hear something about cancer, by and large, it's we've got a new drug on the medication scheme, we've got a new process, women are living longer, fewer women, all of these great things about how we're improving the lives of cancer sufferers every day of the week. Too often we hear people say, oh, the mental health system's broken, it's not working. And it's not perfect. I'm not excusing it in any sense. But what I am saying is if that's the message we're giving people, people will say, well, it can't help me. But we need people to reach out and get that help, whether it's LifeLine or listening to this or talking to their GP or talking to a friend or talking to somebody at work, the employee assistance program. There's a lot more help for people today than there was before. I say I have depression, I have suicidal ideation. I have no shame. I didn't ask for them. I didn't go shopping for them. They came to me. I have no shame about my mental illness. I talk about it openly because I think the more of us who talk about it, the more of us who talk about mental illness, the more we normalise it. So it's normal to have a mental illness. And as you fellas know, the statistics are very clear. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of us will have a mental illness at some stage in our lives. It might be a short episodic depression associated to death in the family or something like that, or it could be something through to lifelong schizophrenia and everything in between. But, we've turned the corner in Australia and more countries are doing it. In fact, we're leading the world. Places like Australia and New Zealand lead the world in the way we talk about this. We've got a distance to go, but it's better than it was last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I mean, let me put it this way. You guys wouldn't be doing a podcast like this 20 years ago. No one would have talked about it.
I wouldn't have even talked about it 5 years ago.
Yeah. Well, John Brogden, you've done an enormous amount of positive work. I've listened to everybody has. You're fairly well known now in your positive messages. Even if one person, even if it's one, if we get everybody one at a time,
correct,
and we do it enough times, we'll get there.
Well, can I give you this? My experience, particularly in politics, is you'd recommend something, or there'd be a new policy or something, and 10 people would be involved, and it wouldn't work for 9, but one of them would work for 1.
Yeah.
You can call that a failure, or you can call that one victory. And it's
so right.
It's person by person, life by life. It really is.
And if people like yourself in positions, John, that spoke out about it, because there'll be people hopefully listening to all of this and they'll realize, even in positions, that they suffer from depression, and to be able to speak out. And I just admire you. Running out of time now, guys, so I hate to cut it in, but just really admire the way you speak out, and I hope other people will come out, and our little bit that we can do that makes us happy.
Good on you.
Yeah, and it's just a pleasure to talk to you. So can I have a final word from you? Can you say something to our viewers all over the world? A final word from you, please, John.
Look, please don't suffer in silence. There's always somebody who cares. Even when you think nobody's going to give you a second chance or a third chance or a fourth chance, there's someone out there, whether it be a lifeline or a crisis line, there's always somebody who cares. You mightn't understand that. You mightn't think that. You might be in that dark corner. But please, you're better off alive than dead, and you're not a burden on our society. We want to get you through that. It probably means out the other end, you are going to have to change what you do. You are going to have to adapt to a new life, but you're better off alive than you are dead.
That's right. You can't come back. You only die once.
Yeah.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you so much, John.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
See you, Marty.
See you. Bye-bye.